It's Thursday afternoon, the third week in August, and the beginning of Indian Market in Santa Fe, New Mexico. This is the most important annual event for scores of Indian artists from across the country. Artists and patrons mingle at glamorous openings that rival gallery scenes in New York or LA.
I met you at Bob Gallegos' home.
And serve as a prelude to the weekend's fair, when over 1,000 native artists set up in booths that snake throughout the streets of the city's historic center. An estimated 80,000 people descend upon Santa Fe for this summer ritual. For almost a century, Indian Market has celebrated the best in Indian arts. And not surprisingly, the largest art category at Indian Market is pottery, given that this rich cultural tradition extends back in our region over 2,000 years. The hundreds of potters who participate today in Indian Market are primarily from the Southwest and have styles firmly tied to this long tradition, but also reflect their individual creativity. A smaller number of these potters have developed novel approaches to their work that can challenge the very definition of what constitutes native art.
It's surreal. It's like a dream.
These innovators, veritable rock stars of Southwest pottery, come from a variety of backgrounds, both on and off reservations. Most now live and work in the vicinity of Santa Fe. Some studied at Santa Fe's Institute of American Indian Art, a center for native arts and experimentation. Others are products of mainstream art programs, but have family members who have been their instructors, mentors, and inspiration as well. All have experimented with a wide range of materials and techniques, but have retained strong ties to their native ancestry.
After I hand polished the green slip, I ran a little bit of brushstrokes of the red slip right over it so that it gave it a nice little color texture to it.
Jody Folwell is considered by many to be the matriarch of Vanguard pottery. Born in 1942 at Santa Clara Pueblo, in the shadow of Black Mesa to Michael and Rose Naranjo, she had a career as an educator before turning to pottery in 1974. Jody branched out from the polished blackware for which her pueblo is famous and began producing works with wry political content and asymmetry decorated with post-firing acrylic paints. Almost 40 years later, her work continues to grow in imaginative new directions. At the same time, she finds satisfaction in returning to polished blackware, albeit with a Jody twist. Jody Falwell's early unconventional submissions to the Indian Market's juried competition prompted the establishment of a new, non-traditional judging category, as recalled by gallery owner Robert Nichols.
And I thought it was the most exciting thing that I'd seen, but I remember it being quite spectacular.
Gene,
fire clouds and that's
that
just
is
beautiful,
gorgeous.
isn't it?
That is, yeah. You are a major part of breaking that groundwork for the next generation of people like me and Susan and all of the contemporaries.
For people my age, it was so much a matter of just trying to stay afloat and not think about anything other than just making the next piece to pay for the rent or to pay for the car payments, to put food on the table, and never thinking about what sort of success it's going to bring about.
Diego Romero is one of many potters who were inspired by Jody Falwell's groundbreaking art. He was born in 1964 and raised in Berkeley, California. He attended the Institute of American Indian Arts and then went on to receive an MFA at UCLA.
I'm not really like this traditional person. I'm more of these kind of contemporary, crossbred, urban Indian kind of guys.
Diego's pots, riffs on Anasazi and Mimbres traditions, infused with Greek painting, comic book art, and other influences, are teeming with historical content and social critique.
You have the old flying saucer here, and the Milky Way, and Numitar's Nebula from Star Trek, and Here we have the Siege of Santa Fe. I went for a dynamic approach in this. I have a border that's implosion and explosion at the same time. It signifies conflict and binary forces coming together in opposition. I have the Pueblo warrior and the conquistador in the foreground. Again, binary forces in opposition.
And you have Diego, who is probably one of the most masterful stylists of all times, taking the innate stylishness of Indian pottery into a completely new realm. I mean, it is ravishing work. You know, Diego making pots with Mimbres Indians playing golf. One of the wonderful, simple ironies of life right there.
Another artist influenced by comic art is Jason Garcia of Santa Clara Pueblo. He hails from a line of renowned Santa Clara potters, including great-grandmother Severa Tafoya. Since 2002, Garcia has developed a strong fan base with his bold painted tiles made with native clay and rendered in a two-dimensional painting style that expressed the mixture of modern and traditional elements in the life of his pueblo.
My work's influenced by popular culture, I guess you would say quote-unquote traditional Pueblo culture, participating in the area of Santa Clara, the religion, ceremonial, dances, but then it's also influenced by graphic novels, rockabilly music, action figures, and so that's some of where my work comes from. I really like the work that Tewa tells of suspense, again using all traditional materials and techniques in the work. This particular image is a silkscreen print that I did, so it's kind of more focusing on the graphic qualities of the line work of comic books. I really like the image that some of the registration's off. It kind of pushes that comic book idea, the newsprint comic strip.
Susan Folwell of Santa Clara is one of two daughters of Jody and painter Henry Folwell. She was born in 1970 at Santa Clara Pueblo. Susan began working with clay when she was just a child. Her mother Jody and her sister Polly Rose were both major influences on her interest in pottery. She studied photography and painting, and then at age 24 returned to make pottery full-time. Susan uses traditional clays to make her vessels and then provides amusing and insightful observations about the political and natural world with designs that are carved, etched, and painted upon the surface.
Clay will humble you. I mean, if you're not going to do it, if you can't find that in your space, clay will do it for you.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure you've come to find that at points in time that,
Definitely.
that the clay will do it for you. Bring you back to earth, so to speak.
Exactly.
Not to be,
yeah.
what do you call that?
A big old crack.
Yeah, a big old crack.
Checks your ego at the door.
It does. Clay definitely checks your ego at the door.
You know, she begins to challenge outmoded ideas within her own culture, but at the same time ideas which we can understand too, because they are simply the strivings of democracy. And we've done that in our culture. It's something which is perfectly readable. It is not something so obscure that we can't understand that in her work.
Yeah, we've seen some of your older stuff, and the way you evolved is just incredible.
Oh, thank you.
Les Namingha is of Hopi and Zuni background. His aunt is Arizona Living Treasure potter Dextra Kotzkeba, the great-granddaughter of Hopi matriarch Nampeo. Les was born in 1967 at Zuni Pueblo and learned pottery making from Dextra during summers spent with his Hopi family. He was raised in Utah, where he received a design degree. Namingha's range of work reflects both Hopi and Zuni traditional influences, as well as bold, contemporary graphic elements.
This piece talks about how we sometimes need heroes, and sometimes they're not there. What I did was I had these bands here that reflect basically the colorful comic book colors to coincide with the two stamps. And then in addition to, I also put two bird designs that come from our culture. And basically what these bird designs are doing is that it's kind of more talking about me personally, I guess, in a sense that Those basically become my heroes, and it's my culture, my traditional teachings that become my heroes to help me go through the bad times and make it through those. Look at the work and enjoy it, and take whatever you can get from it. It's expressing ourselves. This is what our ancestors expressed themselves. Now, in the modern age, this is how we're expressing ourselves, and maybe it's just as simple as that.
Thank you for coming.
Virgil Ortiz is from Cochiti Pueblo and has made an international sensation with his designs that have moved off his pottery to adorn designer clothing, accessories, and household goods sought after by culturati around the world. Born into a family of well-known Cochiti potters, Virgil credits his mother, Seferina Ortiz, as his primary pottery instructor. While still a teenager, he began to experiment with making figures inspired by the fantastic creations of earlier generations of Cochiti potters, selling to the tourist and collector market. Today, Virgil has an outward appearance of a rock star, with an entourage of adoring fans and clients that include the chicest hotels in LA and Las Vegas. But he continues to live at Cochiti and stay deeply involved in the political and cultural life of his pueblo.
My stuff is considered racy, but it's not compared to the actual pieces that were made in the 1800s. And I mean, you could basically, a lot of our people don't even know what existed or what has been made out there until you actually take them to a major collector's house or a museum and show them exactly what our grandmas and grandpas have made back in the day. So what I'm trying to do is just to make as many different subjects to inspire the kids to not be pigeonholed into what a lot of the people consider traditional, as far as like in the Cochiti Pueblo as storytellers or the bowls. Yes, that stuff is there too for a reason and a purpose, and I still do that stuff, but a lot of that stuff stays where it's supposed to be, on the Pueblo.
Christine Navchisi McHorse is a potter who has clearly arrived into the mainstream of fine art pottery. Much of her outstanding sculptural ceramic work makes but oblique reference to her native roots. McHorse was born in 1948 in Morenci, Arizona. Her first formal training began at the age of 14 at the Institute of American Indian Arts, where her instructors included famous Southwestern artists Ellen Hauser, Fritz Scholder, and Charles Loloma. McHorse was introduced to micaceous clay through her Taos Pueblo husband Joel's grandmother, Lena Archuleta.
Well, I was fortunate to attend the Institute when Charles Loloma was teaching, Ottilie Loloma was teaching ceramics as well. I learned to throw on the wheel at a very quickly. It wasn't hard at all, but I became so bored with it that I started taking things off of the wheel and hand building so that I could get more asymmetrical shapes. But I remember the governors from the Pueblos being very, very upset that their children were being taken away from the traditional arts. I decided I was not a traditional Indian or person. I love my Navajo background, my Navajo family and everything, but I also realized that there was a bigger world out there.
To sell their works and increase their exposure, these artists have all participated in Indian market at one time or the other throughout their careers. They are also represented in galleries. They all feel fortunate to be able to try new things and not be unduly restricted by market forces, yet are mindful that pottery is a day job as well as a passion. As with most artists, they are subject to influences from their patrons and agents and might at times feel censure from their families or communities because of their sometimes unorthodox approaches.
This is one of the things that needs to happen, is that we go beyond selling Indian stuff to people who collect Indian stuff. And that's, I think, where the market is and is continuing to go.
Santa Fe and Robert Nichols is a former archaeologist who has operated a native art gallery on Santa Fe's Canyon Road for over 30 years.
I hate the term traditional because it's such a meaningless term, but it's a sales gimmick. Because there is a tradition of making pottery. There are traditional materials and techniques, but there is no one thing that is traditional Indian pottery.
And this is, in North America, a 2,000-year continuous tradition of making pots that has never ended.
Former New York Gallery owner and fine pottery scholar Garth Clark has been credited with shepherding contemporary ceramics into the artistic spotlight.
I was not going to understand any of these artists if I didn't go back 100 years. And that didn't teach me very much, so I went back another 100 and another 100, and eventually I'd done the whole 2,000-year trip. And out of that, I began to develop a much more refined appreciation for the depth and the sophistication and the spirit and a number of things that made this work very exciting. When we look at the contemporary side, you're talking about a small group of artists. That's your cutting edge, that's your avant-garde. And it could change dramatically in the next decade, and I have no doubt that it will. But at this stage, you've got a small group of artists in the Indian community leading the charge for ceramic art.
Throughout the last 2,000 years of pottery production in the Southwest, there have always been innovators as there have been keepers of tradition. Today's upcoming potters, more so than any point in history, have limitless possibilities for creative expression as a result of their exposure to the vast cultural dynamics of our times. This next generation will exercise their freedom to define who they are as individuals, as artists, and as valued members of Native communities entrusted to perpetuate this magnificent ancient Southwestern tradition.
What will be even more exciting is to see the next generation after this generation that is working in contemporary art, because by that time that will be traditional, and it's going to be really exciting to see what's going to happen within the third generation after my group has come and gone.